George is 13. Morning. I'd like to call the Kankakee County Board meeting from April 10th, or for April 10th, to order. Today's invocation is from County Board member George Washington, Jr. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Righty, can I get a roll call, please?
Mr. Tripp. Present. Mr. Washington. Present. Mr. Legess. Mr. Stauffenberg. Mr. Vickery. Present. Mr. Olthoff. Mr. Hess. Present. Mr. Tholen. Present. Mrs. Pope. Mr. McConnell. Present. Mr. Mulcahy. Present. Mr. Scott. Mr. Snipes. Present. Mr. Byrne. Present. Mr. Seroy. Present. Mr. Lear. Present. Mr. Hildebrand. Mrs. Weber. Mr. Einfeld. Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans. Present. Mr. Payton. Present. Mrs. Parker. Present. Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Ritter. Present. Mr. Kinzinger. Present. Mr. Fairfield. Present. Mr. Wheeler.
Present. We have a quorum. Under public commentary, I have Chris Tipple, Kankakee, back at the microphone over here. That one, yes.
My name is Chris Tipple. I'm here in protest against the installation of solar farms within Kankakee. But I would like to start off with one initial comment and question. The April 1st article that was published in the Daily Journal, with, I'm assuming, the consent of the chairman of the board, Andrew Wheeler, and Tim Yonka, as a joke about solar farms being installed in our county, mocking the citizenry who had come before the board with their concerns relative to the installation of solar farms, specifically the one on Highland Road, was in very poor taste. So my question is, did you think it was a good idea to mock the citizens of Kankakee who were concerned about the installation and the dangers involved with the solar farm? I am expecting a response. to that question.
Do you have any other comment?
Do I have?
Any other comments?
No, I am expecting a response to that particular question. Did you think it was appropriate to mock the citizenry by using a request and concern that had come before the board to make a false article with the consent of the Daily Journal?
Ma'am, I don't work for the Daily Journal. I haven't for years, and that was their article, not mine. This is not about a debate. I won't answer questions. If you have public comment, please go forward and do so.
Except your name was mentioned in the article after they supposedly interviewed you.
Ma'am, do you have any other comment?
Yes, my other comment would be that it shows a resounding lack of respect for the citizenry and a resounding lack of objectivity because you chose to make a joke out of our concerns. So it brings into question your ability to make clear and objective choices relative to this situation if you choose to make a joke out of those people who bring a sensitive subject to you, and then you decide to make a public issue out of it using the local newspaper.
Ma'am, I am not an employee of the newspaper, and I haven't been for 8 years, I believe.
Understood.
They
Except
write their
your
own
name was
articles, I do
mentioned
not.
in the article.
My name's in a lot of articles in the paper. Do you have any other comment on any other subject?
I do not.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Jim Wasser from Kankakee.
It's the St. Anne mailing address.
St. Anne mailing address. All right.
My name is Jim Wasser. I live in Park Lane Manor off Highland Road at 5896 Rose Circle, right on the water, and I'm not too far from the new supposed 13-acre farm. First of all, not to get in a discussion of the match, I always, with the freedom of speech, I always respect other people's concerns. Personally, from my viewpoint, and I'm not here to get points from the county board because I've been here before and I think you know that. I personally did not see that as an insult to the people. That's my opinion. It was just an April Fool's joke, as far as I'm concerned, like years ago, and they had a shark where I used to fish down by the Kankakee Dam. So that's how I look at it. But how other people perceive it, that's certainly their right. But I do have a few questions that hopefully I can get answered. I was unavailable to make the meetings because I deal a lot with veterans, and those came first. But I was told that this will be a 13-acre site. I believe they call it a community solar farm. And from what I understand, it would be able to service roughly 400 homes. Now, Dave DeYoung and I are both on the Snake Creek Drainage Commission, and I believe he's on the Board of Appeals or something. So he showed me a picture, and according to him, certainly they put a fence around it, and whether they're evergreens or whatever to somewhat make it aesthetically pretty, which is kind of hard to put something out in the middle of the field and make it aesthetically beautiful. But I'd like to ask, for one, how many times are they going to maintain that a year? According to Dave, when he talked to me, he said it would only be 3 times a year. That's what I was told. I would like verification of that maybe later on when they get to a discussion or sometime, because I don't believe that's near enough. If they're asking to use the ground, I think they should do it more than 3 times, and I'm sure they're going to need a small road in. And also, is there anything buried in the ground in this community solar farm other than the pipes that support the panels? Okay, and later on, say they would come, because I know this could possibly just be their foot in the door, not knowing what would happen if they come in later. I would assume it'd be a variance. Well, now we want to add another 15 or 20 acres. Okay, I don't know how that would go. I'm sure it would have to go in front of you again for a variation or whatever. But I think for one, the maintenance, but what is going in the ground? If there's anything other than the pipes, I was told that actually support the panels. And these panels, I know can go this way, but do they also have the capabilities to go sideways? So that's really my questions. And I'm certainly not for it, but you know, that's why we always can agree to disagree on something. But I think there'd be a lot better sites there that would be far away from someone that would not really cast bad aesthetics on, especially the subdivision, because I know it's not too far off of Warren Avenue to the south. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next one is Todd McDonald. from Kankakee.
Hi. The community group Connect Kankakee would like to ensure input from county residents regarding the Phase 3 expansion of the county's correctional facilities. To that end, we ask the following questions. What is the current status of the Phase 3 jail expansion? How many additional detainees and inmates will be held in Kankakee after the Phase 3 addition is completed? How will public comment be solicited? What is the anticipated ICE demand for detainees held in Kankakee in the future, and how is that documented? Of the current $80 per day that the county is paid per detainee from outside agencies, what is the cost to the country per detainee? Detainees are assigned a risk level prior to arriving in Kankakee. What is the risk level makeup of current inmates and detainees? And what policies are in place to control the makeup of future inmates and detainees? Of the 150 current ICE detainees, how many are Kankakee County residents? All right, that's a mouthful. That is all.
If you want to email those to me, I try to find the answers and email them back as much as is available in disclosure and all of that stuff. So I'd be happy to just email it to my email.
Okay.
Talk with the sheriff, and I'll see if I can get you some answers.
That would be fantastic. I didn't give you any time to answer any of those questions, but
It's not the proper form, but we can definitely get you the answers you need. Okay.
We would appreciate that. Thank you for your time.
Yep. All right, and last is Dr. Wendy Menigo from St. Anne.
You don't need me to spell it, do you?
No.
All right. What I'm here to do today is to inform the county board members who are not supposed to listen to their constituents about what actually is occurring or what occurred last night at the zoning board meeting. I know after I spoke last time, I was pretty passionate and angry. I'm calm today. That Mr. Wheeler up there told you all you cannot listen to us, or you can listen to us. You can listen to us, but you can't respond and you cannot engage us. Found out some very disturbing stuff last night after we left the zoning board meeting. And that is that really the decision was on the zoning board, not, I mean, you guys really, I was told you have to vote on only those, only that packet of information that is given to you by Cypress Creek or Mike back there, Community Power Group. That's the only stuff you can look at. This, you know, and I keep bringing this document up, and I don't know if you have it, but it's addressed to you. Solar Energy Development Informational Report to the County Board. I brought this with last night, and it is written by Delbert Skimmerhorn. And I asked Mr. Skimmerhorn if he stood by the statements in this document. He said, I wrote it. I said, okay. So then I opened it up, knowing that, oh, hold on. And I don't know, if you can, you guys need to see if you have this. And I'll be honest with you, I don't even know how I got my hands on it because so many residents are handing me things. But a big issue is the property values and the aesthetics. And right in Mr. Skimmerhorn's, hold on, I had it circled, page 8 in his report, Mr. Skimmerhorn states, sorry, I should have my cheaters on. Regarding property values, and I quote, solar farms are being newly introduced into the state of Illinois. Due to this fact, there is insufficient data which exists to derive any meaningful conclusion pertaining to a solar farm's impact on the market value of surrounding or nearby properties. Those are Mr. Skimmerhorn's words. Now, Mr. Wheeler will tell you to ignore everything I said, but I know you can't unhear or can't unsee something. Apparently, Mr. Skimmerhorn and the zoning board are good at that because they totally ignored this information. The other thing that Mr. Skimmerhorn, which he said, I wrote it, he didn't say stood by it, was goal 2 in this report to the county board. Goal 2, protect and enhance the extensive open space areas that are essential to the overall image and character of Kankakee County and its municipalities. Preserve the county's distinctive rural, natural, and cultural resources. Mr. Skimmerhorn's words. He ignored those as well, and so did everyone but one gentleman on the end, and I wish I could remember his name. He dissented or voted no because he said the solar panel company did not produce enough information that would show that our property values would not be affected. Now, the solar panel people will tell you that there's an independent study hired by Kirschnick and somebody, I don't know, begins with a K, that they all hired out in Massachusetts to check property values, and it doesn't affect anybody's property values. That's in Massachusetts. It's not out by us. And, hold on, I'm nervous. That's not out by us. We had a lot of people stand up last night. A lot of people stand up last night. And we haven't initiated our call you guys, you know, on Sunday night and 6 a.m. in the morning, and a lot of your phone numbers don't work. Because we wanted to see what happened last night. And like I said, when I left there, I was very disturbed to find out that people came up to me and said, it's a done deal. The county board has to vote on only what you have been given. You can't listen to anything we say, and you can't listen to your constituents. And I think that's terrible because the solar panel people are going to leave, and we're the people that are left here. And Mr. Kinzinger, my family, we went out and we tried to get people to vote for your brother. Miss Parker, my kids go to school with you. Pat Polk, who's not here. My kids did a lot of stuff at the pageant with. You know, a lot of people who live out there have businesses in town, and you're going to see us. You're going to see us all over the place. They're going to leave, and we're going to stay here. And I'm asking you to do what Mr. Skimmerhorn did. Ignore what ignore what Mr. Wheeler's telling you, because Mr. Skimmerhorn ignored his own words. And listen to your constituents who are going to be here. We're not against solar energy. And anybody else, all these other ones, these 13 others that are up, go ahead. If nobody's upset and there's no properties around them, go ahead and let them in. No, I was going to put solar energy on my house. Nobody's against it. We're asking you not to destroy our neighborhood. And there is no guarantee that more of them won't go down. I know you can't get on the Facebook page, but if you look, you will see that they get one parcel, and then they get another parcel, and then they get another parcel. They're doing it all down in Champaign. So and I understand you need money. So go ahead and do the ones that nobody cares about. But we had a gentleman from the East Coast who moved out here. He's an engineer at CSL Bearing who said he moved out there because of the beautiful farm fields and the river and the houses and the neighborhood and driving down Highland Road. It's not an industrial area. Thank you.
Thank you. Just, I don't know if the board knows this, but we actually created the document and put it online so the public would have that document on solar farms. So. You got, no? Check. So I just want to make sure the board remembers we had the document prepared so both the board and the public would have the information on solar farms, and we put it online. That's where it came from. So moving on, proclamations. We have a proclamation from April 2018 as Child Abuse Prevention Month. If we could read that into the record, please. Sorry.
Proclamation of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois, proclaiming April 2018 as Child Abuse Prevention Month. Whereas preventing child abuse and neglect is a community problem that depends on involvement among people throughout the community. And whereas child abuse and neglect often occurs when people find themselves in stressful situations without community resources or support from their community. And whereas the majority of child abuse cases could be prevented with an engaged and supportive community. And whereas we all have a responsibility as individuals, neighbors, community members, and citizens of Kankakee County to assist in helping children become confident and successful adults. And whereas child abuse and neglect can be reduced by making sure each family has the support they need in raising their children in a safe, nurturing environment. And whereas effective child abuse prevention programs succeed because of partnerships created among social service agencies, schools, faith communities, civic organizations, law enforcement agencies, and the business community. Now therefore be it proclaimed by the Kankakee County Board that April is declared Child Abuse Prevention Month, and we call upon all citizens, community agencies, faith groups, medical facilities, and businesses to increase their participation in our efforts to support families, thereby preventing child abuse and strengthening the communities in which we live.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the proclamation? First, Mr. Tholen, second, Mr. Washington. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. The next, I have a proclamation recognizing Daniel Bishop for the creation of the Survey 123 public survey application. That was something that was around the floods we had, and deserves special recognition. So if I could, I'd like to get that read in the record as well.
Proclamation of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois, recognizing Daniel Bishop for the creation of the Survey 123 public survey application. Whereas Kankakee County suffered tremendous flooding earlier this year, and whereas Lieutenant Chad Gessner and his team at the Emergency Management Agency reacted to the crisis with expediency and unrivaled professionalism, and whereas their work was made significantly easier by the efforts of Daniel Bishop, the Geographical Information Systems Coordinator for the county. And whereas Mr. Bishop created the Kankakee County Flood Survey within a phone application named Survey 123. And whereas this application allowed flood victims to report damages, flood levels, and other key pieces of information for the EMA team to utilize and respond to. And whereas this application is being reviewed for use throughout the state for similar crises, such as tornadoes, fires, and terrorist acts. Now therefore be it proclaimed by the Kankakee County Board that it greatly appreciates the dedication and hard work of both Daniel Bishop and the EMA team in responding to the 2018 Kankakee River flood. Be it further proclaimed that Daniel Bishop saved countless man-hours by the creation of the Kankakee County Flood Survey, and the Kankakee County Board recognizes Mr. Bishop for his initiative and devotion to serving the citizens of Kankakee County.
Can I get a motion to approve, please? Mr. Tripp and Mr. Byrne on the second. Any questions? And you are number 5. Did you have a question?
No, I was just going to second.
Oh, okay.
I'm a little late.
Well,
though.
you get thirds. How about that?
I get thirds.
Mr. McConnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree that this is a good proclamation, but I really want to commend Lieutenant Gessner for what he's done. We had a couple meetings with him, and you know, they worked tirelessly, just tirelessly, round the clock to get everything done.
Yeah, I think the speakers are turned down for some reason because we're.
Okay. Well, anyway,
Yeah.
Lieutenant Gessner really deserves kudos also along with this, and you know, the entire team, everybody did an exceptional job getting control and getting a handle of this thing, and I just think they need to be commended also.
I'd agree. A lot of people don't know that they were out before the flood knocking on doors to see if people were going to stay or if they're going to leave. Yep. There was a lot of work that went in before, during, and after. Yes. That if you're, you know, they just don't sit on social media and talk about what they're doing. They kind of are out there helping people. So,
thank you.
Any other comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. If Dell, do you have Daniel here? All right, please meet me up over here.
Diane, you get a cheat sheet. Thank you. I was here half last month.
I
would just like to say that Daniel is an asset to our department, and we are really glad to have him. Thank you.
Wish we had time to run through the app. I'd put it up there, but it's a thing of beauty. It was made it so people could just do the damage reports right from their home, right from their phone. Especially when the power was out in the homes, they were able to get that out and get in. It saved us at least 2.5, 3 weeks on the process, which means people were able to get help quicker. So, moving on. Under, let's see, vacancies under Oh, excuse me. I almost skipped one very important part of this. One of the things that I wanted to make sure that the rest of the board members have seen is a total presentation about what the solar projects entail. We've seen it at PZA, and since the board is going to be going through this, I thought it was important that we at least go through what the process is as far as we know what the siting process as far as the build outs and those types of things. To have Cypress Creek here to talk about that a little bit I thought was important, so we'd like to welcome them up to the front to give us a little more information as a group. I apologize for the redundancy to the PZA committee and those who have been through this, but we thought it was important that everybody sees this.
Good morning. Mark Gershon on behalf of Cypress Creek. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today. We're going to do essentially an abbreviated version of the presentation we did both at the public hearing and at the PZA. So it'll be the same information that they heard, but just to give you a good general sense of it. This clearly, our involvement is on our projects for you today, but as a general rule, I would say that they probably apply to all, or I should say, any solar farm we're aware of, and certainly the ones that are on your agenda. Most of this is pretty common to that area. I can't speak on behalf of the other, but I think it's pretty common to it. I'm going to ask Scott Novak with Cypress to come up here, and again, we'll try and generally go over some of these issues and have him walk through the first part of the presentation.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark. And thanks for the opportunity here. I think it's always helpful, given how new solar is to the state of Illinois, to hear some kind of basic information, what sometimes I call a solar 101. And I apologize to the members of the PZA because you're going to hear, well, the same thing that you heard a couple of weeks ago. I will try to move through a little bit quicker, just in the interest of preserving time. First things first, I'm Scott Novak, Senior Developer for Cypress Creek Renewables. Cypress Creek Renewables is a national developer, builder, owner, and operator of solar farms. We were formed a few years ago in 2014, but by a few folks who had 20 years of individual experience developing solar in different markets, and they came together with the idea of replicating that nationwide, and that's what we've been doing. We've developed 2.2 gigawatts of solar as a company, which is a great accomplishment that we hit at the end of 2017. We operate about 150 solar power plants across the country. To give an idea of where we're located, the yellow states are where we have active solar farms that have been developed and now are being operated by us. And the shaded blue states are where we have development projects underway, such as in Illinois. So you can see we're really a nationwide company. Solar in general is very much a growing industry. Something impressive, last year, 30% of all new electricity that came online, or new generating capacity, I should say, came from solar. So that's second only to natural gas as a form of electricity. So even among its peers in power generation, it's very much a growing industry. A lot of what's fueling growth are prices. Prices have come down substantially. Since 2010, over 70%. And I'm not talking just specifically about the modules or about the transformers or inverters. Really, all the equipment that makes up a solar farm has all experienced this great reduction in price. And that's simply because there's more players in the industry now, and the technology is advancing, and economies of scale are kicking in, and there's some really nice things that are making solar make sense really all over the world, not just in places like California and Nevada, which is the way it was a few years ago. In terms of in the States. The Illinois Future Energy Jobs Act is something that you guys have probably heard of and are familiar with. Kankakee County is taking an initiative to become a player in renewables, and we really appreciate that. We've circled Kankakee County for a few reasons, one of which is the Kankakee Community College is just a wonderful institution that you guys know very well, of course. Both general education, but also they have a renewables program that's fantastic, and we've actually invested in the program. We announced about a month and a half ago a $10,000 scholarship for solar job training. So we'd like to invest in workforce development in different markets, and we thought that KCC was really impressive. I'm really excited to be moving forward here in the county. I just real quick, we're not talking about solar thermal. That's simply an array of mirrors that redirects sunlight to a central location. In Illinois, and really the majority of all, when you hear the term solar, people are generally talking about photovoltaics. I just wanted to clarify that's what we're talking about, and that's what other developers in Illinois will be talking about in building. PV for short. So solar PV, which is essentially sunlight in, electricity out. They can be mounted in a few ways. The way that we're proposing them to be mounted is what you see on the image on the right, single axis tracking. So these modules move ever so slowly throughout the day. They start in the morning, they're facing east, and then they're kind of flat as the sun's overhead around midday. And then in the afternoon, they're facing west, but they only move in that single direction. They're mounted on steel posts. So there's no concrete underneath the modules themselves. The only concrete on the site houses the inverter and transformer equipment, which I'll show you a picture of in a second. This picture also gives a good idea of the scale. So this guy is, 6 feet tall. So generally to the top of these modules is about 7 to 8 feet. This is another picture that shows what goes on underneath. So it's a good image of their, it's ground cover underneath the modules, and the wiring is kind of neatly tucked up under the modules. And then this is a picture of a midday solar farm that has the tracking system. So when I said flat overhead, that's kind of what I meant. So you can see it's kind of like flat, like a table. Another just kind of scaled out picture shows some more components of a solar farm, including the fence and an access road. This is the equipment I referenced earlier, the inverter and transformer equipment. This equipment's also the only equipment that really makes any noise to speak of. However, outside of 150 feet from this, you really can't even detect the noise that comes from it. And this equipment's always kind of central and internal to the site, nowhere near the property line, nowhere near within that 150-foot border. Some other equipment on a site, solar farms are pretty simple. You've got your modules I showed you pictures of earlier. The inverter and transformer, that's to right. And by the way, that equipment is basically stepping down the voltage or up to get to the level that it gets inserted into the grid, and also converting it from DC to AC so that it's grid ready. Combiner boxes are what ties all the modules together before it gets fed underground. So the wires and conductor cables are all subsurface. So those are fed from those rows of modules that I showed you earlier down to the equipment you see to the right. And then from there, it goes underground to the point of interconnection where it comes above ground with a few new power poles that then get connected into the existing power lines or the distribution lines that are at the site. And then I talked briefly about fencing earlier. There'll be an 8-foot chain link fence all around the site. That's part of National Electric Code, and it's also something that developers or owners and operators of solar farms just want to protect their assets and keep a secure site. Some pictures of the construction. On the left, we have post-driving equipment. So that's how we get those steel posts into the ground. A lot of times my team likes to compare them to guardrails, posts that support guardrails on the highway. That's the type of thing that we're talking about here. On the right is a picture of all of the posts after they've been inserted. That site is waiting for modules to be installed. Agricultural impact. Big topic in Illinois because we're a great farming state and we have wonderful farm ground here. So we knew just before we even entered the state that we were going to take everything related to agricultural impact very seriously, and that includes both the ground. We like to limit our impact on the above surface, so we don't really move dirt. We don't do grading. We don't bring dirt. We don't excavate and take dirt away. We like to work with the site in its existing condition, but also subsurface. So field tiles are something that are just prevalent pretty much everywhere. And so we will go in before final design of the site and final engineering and do a field tile survey and understand where the field tiles are located, both main lines and then to the best that we can, the lateral feeder lines too. We'll design around them, and we, should we damage or break one during the construction process, or if we find out later on, we will fix. the tiles and make sure that the drainage is flowing as it was before we were there. Cover cropping actually helps, and I have a civil engineer with us as well who can talk about how local ground cover is a nice kind of change from farmland as far as the ability to absorb the water. There's also some benefits to letting the ground lie fallow. So this is not a permanent change. We didn't come to the Zoning Board of Appeals asking for a map amendment. We came in asking for a special use. And that's great because we think that this should be and continue to be farmland. Some pictures. So we don't have any in Illinois, and that's really a function of the state and where the state is at the moment. That's going to change. But for now, we do have 3 solar farms just over the border in Indiana. Now, it's a little south of here, so not super easy. I'd encourage you guys to take a look. It's around the Terre Haute region, all 3 of our solar farms there. And this is about a little more than double the scale of each individual project we're talking about today. This is a 5 megawatt project, covers about 45 acres. So today, all of the sites that are on your agenda are 2 megawatt sites, so a little less than half. But this gives a good image of what they look like, both from the air and also from the ground. And this is a different solar farm, same scale. And again, on the left, we see what it looks like above, and then from the ground on the right. Just want to highlight there's no safety risks. Every aspect of a solar farm, from its inception, from the design process to the construction process, is done through this typical standard permitting processes and designed and by certified engineers. That's from a civil standpoint, from an electrical standpoint. Of course, we also have to apply for stormwater and sediment control permits. And then we also have to be compliant with a number of national codes, National Building Code, National Electrical Code. From a safety perspective, I mentioned we have a secure fence around the entire solar farm. And then we also maintain the vegetation to prevent overgrowth. So we don't want weeds or grasses growing up through our panels. So we spec local ground cover that's slow and low growth. So like maximum height 24 inches. But when mowing and weed control is needed, that's when we send a crew in to take care of that a few times a year. We monitor the sites remotely, so we don't have anybody sitting there, but we know when something's wrong electrically with the site because we can see the data. So at that point, we'll send an electrical engineer out to inspect and repair any issues. But again, that's estimated less than a handful of less than 4 or 5 times a year on the maintenance side of things. And that's done locally. So that's a local electrical engineer that goes out. Same with the vegetation maintenance. That's local as well. I mentioned sound earlier. These are extremely quiet. Really, the only noise to speak of comes from a cooling fan from that inverter we talked about earlier. And that white circle there in the bigger yellow circle on the bottom right of the screen, that signifies a 150-foot radius. So outside of that white circle, you really can't detect noise from that equipment. And even if we were right next to it, it sounds like a fan. I mean, we could still have a conversation. But it's not spilling over property line at all, not even close. Same thing applies to electromagnetic fields, which sometimes you hear about, just in general. I'm not talking about specifically to a solar. There's nothing on a solar farm that makes this makes EMF at any kind of undue, unsafe levels. The equipment that is the inverter and transformer pair is the strongest source. But again, outside of 150 feet from that equipment, conveniently, you can't feel that you can't detect that EMF above the Earth's magnetic field. I mean, it's also important to note that everything in nature, our cell phones, power lines, appliances, all creates EMF. But even if you're right next to the equipment as that gentleman is, as I've been a number of times, there's no safety concerns whatsoever. Many benefits to local solar. From an environmental perspective, from a individual perspective, and if you want to participate in this renewable energy revolution, whatever you want to call it, before you had to go out and buy modules and put them on your roof, and you had to have a south-facing roof, and it had to be structurally, intact, and you had to invest in it. Now you can subscribe to a community solar farm, and you can feel like you're creating renewable energy, but at no cost to you. In fact, the benefit is reduced electricity costs. They're quiet. I mentioned that, virtually self-sufficient. And then, of course, there's an economic growth perspective of this. Both, there's not a whole lot of permanent jobs when you look at them on an individual basis by the function that they're self-sufficient. I mentioned that earlier. There is maintenance. There's routine vegetative maintenance, which is local, and then there's kind of as needed inspection and maintenance. Those are kind of, when you add them up over a bunch of different solar farms, it's substantial money that's being invested each year. But there's a big construction job component, and we like to source local as much as possible. And we know where we are as far as, using local labor, and that's a huge initiative for us as well. Each one of these jobs creates each one of these solar farms, 2 megawatt, creates about 25 construction jobs. And there's also a tax component, though. Right now, these sites are all assessed as ag land, and they're kicking off very, very minimal property tax revenue. Right now, there's a discussion about what the taxes are going to look like. And so there's not a clear answer. I can't stand up here and say it's going to be X dollars. I can say on a low-end estimate, a 2 megawatt site in year one will be no less than $10,000 in this part of the state per year. That otherwise is a magnitude of, I think we looked at it, it was under $1,000, maybe even under $600 per site on an ag level. So again, when you compile a bunch of them, they start to add up, and these are important dollars that don't come with any costs. That's the key here. So this is money, there's not additional county services, there's not additional investment into roads, or there's no utilities needed, there's no extra students that come to this. The schools see the bulk of this, and they just get the revenue without any costs associated with it. So that's a wonderful benefit. And also there's this concern about animals. Rightfully so. We want to preserve and protect the environment, both the land and nature. The solar farms, all the equipment is perfectly safe for birds and wildlife. There's zero long-term environmental impact at all that comes from a solar farm. Okay, so what we did was we compiled all 9 of the solar farms that we're here presenting today. Compiled all that together on a summary slide to just talk about numbers, right? So when you compile about 9 2 megawatt sites, you're talking about around 2,900 homes worth of power. I want to highlight again, solar farms don't require any utilities, whether it be electricity, water, gas, nothing from the county at all. We're talking about a total investment in the neighborhood of $35 million. I don't think we corrected that number, actually. We have a slight typo on that. Let me skip down to local annual spending, which is about $250,000. And again, that covers mowing and then any sort of electrical engineering we need to do, some repairs and maintenance of the solar farms themselves. And then 25 times 9 is 225 construction jobs throughout the construction period of a farm. And it's about 12 to 16 weeks of construction for a 2 megawatt solar farm. So that's kind of my big picture solar 101 intro. Hopefully that was helpful. I do want to turn it over to, we're going to Drew. Yeah. Yeah.
So that number we were looking at, that number we were looking at before, the total investment is
around 36 million.
Around 36 million for the total number. What you're looking at right now is a single project, 2 megawatts. We apologize that number wasn't changed on the slide, but it's 3.9 million for one and roughly 36 million there for 9. And I think the other was correct.
Yeah, no, I think that one was correct. I think the local spending during construction was multiplied by.
18. Somebody 9 times 2.3.
Yeah, that was it. It was too many.
Yeah, 20 million something.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Hand over to Drew now.
Yeah.
Okay. Why don't you introduce him?
Drew. So, yes. Yeah. So before I introduce Drew from Cone Resnick, one of the things that I think you should be aware of is that back last year or so, when the report was done by your staff at your request about solar farms, that was before we saw the current growth in farms in Illinois, because of the Illinois statute that was passed, because of what's going on in the state. And the nice advantage of being here today is that we now do have the studies that have since that time gone through, looked at those values, et cetera. And that's why I'd like to turn this over to Cone Resnick and ask Drew to walk you through those, and then I'll close up at the end.
Thanks, Mark.
Drew's going to show us how much taller he is than Scott.
It's getting there. There we go. That'll do. Hi, good morning. My name is Andrew Lines. I'm a real estate appraiser, and I work for an audit, tax, and advisory firm called Cone Resnick. We're a national firm, 3,500 employees. We're 8th on the list of national audit firms. And we have a local office here in Chicago where I live and go to work every day. Patricia McGarr is my direct supervisor. She's the National Director of Evaluation for the firm. And she's been doing this for about 30 years. She's done a lot of impact studies, which measure differences in price appreciation and home values next to sites that people might think might be deleterious and cause an impact to residential home values. Landfills, Walmarts, quarries, high-tension power lines, and Cypress Creek came to us about a year ago and asked if we would prepare an impact study for some of their zoning change and proposals, just like this one. I'll note that this past year, Governor Rauner appointed her to the state of Illinois Department of Financial Regulations and the Real Estate Appraisal Board, where she was nominated and elected as the vice chair. I work with Pat McGarr. I'm also a real estate appraiser. I'm licensed here in the state of Illinois. I'm also licensed in the state of Indiana, Wisconsin, New York, New Jersey, Florida, Georgia, Maryland, and Arizona. And I do appraisal work pretty much all across the country. I manage a staff of about 35 individuals, and we help do a lot of different real estate appraisals, fair value analyses for financial reporting, and impact studies. So what did we do? Over this last year, when Cypress came to us as an independent appraiser, I must produce my reports in compliance with the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, or USPAP. So I'm an independent consultant for this project. So the first thing we did is we took a look at published studies. There must be some published studies out there that indicate whether or not solar farms might be a hazard to adjacent real estate property. And over the last 20 years, we couldn't find any such document. It just simply doesn't exist. But what the published studies did tell us was that on average, farmland acquired for solar farm development typically transfers 30 to 50% higher than regular ag land. So we know that. We also know that, as Scott had said before, that it can be a tax boon. In our own analysis, we've seen that taxes to local municipalities have increased from ag 2,400 to 8,400%. Very, very significant. And finally, we know that from the published studies that there didn't appear to be any kind of harmful impact with regards to electromagnetic waves or any of that. It's simply not a nuisance. And it was interesting, I think I heard somebody say earlier they felt like this was an industrial use. But when you actually look at the terminology for an industrial use or heavy industrial use, that typically involves some kind of active and intense use of the site. We feel, especially as real estate appraisers, that this is a very passive use of the site. You don't have hardly any trucks coming into the site. You don't have trucks passing by all the adjacent property and neighborhood. I'm trying to get to the site every day, and it's extremely quiet. So I don't know if really categorizing as industrial is fair. So we took a look at all of the available solar farms that have actually been developed here in the state of Illinois and also in the state of Indiana. Just so you know, Indiana has had about 3 to 4 times more solar development up to this point than the state of Illinois. And so as a person who likes data, we obviously went right across the border to take a look at what we believe is fairly similar kind of land, similar topography, and very much similar demographics. So we found 7 different farms, solar farms, to study. And what we did is we looked to see all the homes and farmsteads and farms that are located around an existing solar field, we saw and measured, and so how many of those actually sold and what were their price points? And how long did they take to sell? Okay. And then when we looked at the median of those, we then selected sales that were locationally removed from those sales right around the solar farm, but in the same general area. And when we looked at the median values for those, we compared the two to see if there's any statistical difference. Randy Bell, who's an MAI and a PhD, wrote a really great book called Real Estate Damages. And for someone like me who does impact studies, that's generally our Bible for understanding how to measure these discrepancies in order to see whether or not there's actually a trend and some kind of analysis and statistical information that shows that there should be an impact on adjacent home values. So let me show you some of our results. Here's the book that I mentioned. Again, if a legitimate detrimental condition exists, there will likely be a measurable and consistent difference between the two sets of market data. And again, that's a targeted control data, so the area right around a solar farm, and then homes and farmsteads removed from the solar farm. If not, there will likely be no significant difference between the two sets of data. So here's the first one we looked at. This is actually in Streeter. It's a quite large solar farm. I think it's about 20 megawatts. And so we had looked at all of the farmsteads and some of the homes that were located right around that solar farm. And you can see here as we plotted them out. And when we looked at a sale that had sold, number 12, in direct view of the solar farm, and we looked at similar homes in the general area, we found that the house that was right next to the solar farm actually sold for a higher price than the median around it. So to us, that suggested that there wasn't really any empirical evidence that the solar farm was a deleterious influence on the adjacent residential property. Here's another one in Porter County, Indiana. This was great because you had a row of single-family homes that were immediately adjacent to a very large acreage parcel that was developed with a solar farm. And again, we found both for the residential homes and for the agricultural land right next to it that, again, there wasn't any statistical information that indicated that the solar farm was adversely impacting the adjacent property. Here's a third one in Frankton, Indiana. This is a smaller farm. I think it's only about 1.5 megawatts, so a little bit more similar to what's being proposed here in this county. Again, we took a look at the residential property that was directly adjacent to the solar farm, and we couldn't find any meaningful data or any specific trends that would indicate that there was an issue with being next to a solar farm. Here's one of the last ones, one of the best ones that I thought that we took a look at. Again, this is a very, very large solar farm. It's 5 times the amount of PV panels than what's being proposed on a single site here. And again, there was a beautiful subdivision just north of the solar farm, a beautiful row of very similar residential properties that backed up to the solar farm itself. And we found a bunch that had sold since the solar farm had been erected, and we were able to compare those with properties in further removed from the solar farm. It was really great is that the builder of that subdivision also built a subdivision about 1.5 miles north and 2 miles west. So very similar homes by the same home builder, same kind of marketability, and we couldn't find any difference, meaningful difference in the sale prices of the homes located away from the solar farm than ones that were located directly across the street. This is a summary of all of the impact studies that we did. Of the 7 solar farms, we were able to conduct 11 different compare and contrasts. When you look at all of them, there wasn't really a meaningful difference. It says 3.9% in favor of the homes around the solar farm. I'm not suggesting that your home values will go up because you're next to a solar farm, but there certainly wasn't any empirical evidence to suggest that they would go down. Lastly, we conducted interviews with assessors, local assessors in counties and townships where a lot of these solar farms were. We interviewed 8 different people with regards to whether or not they saw any trends that indicated that in their own townships that they were seeing any kind of diminution in value being based right next to a solar farm. Not only did none of the assessors tell us that they saw an impact, but nobody had come to them to ask for a tax decrease because they were next to a solar farm. Residential and small residential homes, people who live in small, homes that are adjacent to solar farms, you think if anybody would be upset, that it would be them. And not in one single case has anybody stepped forward to suggest that the solar farm itself was playing or influencing an adverse impact to their residential home values. And finally, I'd like to show you the big solar farm development in Indianapolis. After the solar farm was created, somebody decided to develop a $500,000 plus estate home with an in-ground pool, less than 150 feet from the solar farm. And to us, that suggested that it was pretty much impossible for the solar farm to be adversely impacting residential home development if someone would build such a large and complete estate home with a nice in-ground pool, again, right next to a solar farm. Thank you for your time. Happy to answer any questions that anybody might have.
Any questions from the board? Mr. Snipes?
I've heard from both sides. I even heard from a teacher in high school in opposition to this. And I'm looking at your presentation, and I noticed in the marketing side and that all of the commentary was from Indiana. But you showed something in Streeter. They had a farm or whatever, and why not any marketing commentary from individuals in Illinois?
Yes, we did. Let me pull it up. It's hard to read.
We recognize you might not be able to read the comments.
I'm looking at, okay, I see Indiana, Indiana. Is there?
Yeah, the first one, we contacted the selling broker of a house next to the Grand Ridge Solar Farm, which is the one in Streeter, Tina Sargenti with Cardwell Banker, and we were told that the proximity of the solar farm had no impact on the marketing time or the selling price of the property.
Yeah, I noticed everything said Indiana. It should have said Illinois, so I would know that was in Illinois. Nothing in there said.
Apologize for that.
But I noticed that, again, the majority are from the Indiana area.
And just so you know, the reason for that is simply that Indiana, as we all know, Illinois passed a law now calling for solar farms, providing for both a marketplace for how those would be developed. Indiana simply was a little bit ahead, so their farms were built over the last couple of years, and that's why you're now seeing groups here. If you look at the numbers, I heard someone from Springfield, I apologize, I can't remember what her governmental title was, but talk about the fact that right now Illinois' numbers are incredibly low on solar by comparison to Indiana, but they're expected to exceed Indiana soon because of the fact that they've now passed this law. And it's simply the Indiana farms came in first, and that's why we've got those. We could have, as you saw from our map, talked about solar farms all over the country, but we wanted to give you a state that was in the Midwest, that was some of which are very close to Illinois, to use as our comparison.
Okay, with your data, I see that you were founded in 2014. The data that you submitted goes back to 2012. And so I'm thinking that what can I share with the constituents that a Vulcan solar company is not a voucher solar company? Vulture, like the vulture.
Oh, vulture.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, do you want to talk about the new rule as far as expansion? I heard it earlier. Is that what you're talking about? The fact that they're going to start with a little one and then all of a sudden it's going to be all around there?
Mm-hmm.
So first, the Illinois Act, which is being worked on right now, specifically limits the size of the community solar projects. That's why we're within this. But more importantly, we didn't get here by starting yesterday with you guys. We have to go through an entire special use process. We worked for an extensive period of time with your staff, with community residents, with our farm owners and on location, et cetera, all to bring forward a special use through your zoning process, et cetera. even though under the state rules, we wouldn't be expanding these, but the practical answer is, more importantly, we'd have to come back to you if we attempted to expand any of these. So we're getting approval for a 2 megawatt solar project. We're not getting approval for any other size.
Mr. Legess, did you have something?
Yeah, I just had a question, a couple of them. First is, how do you choose a site? And then the second one is, when I looked at the Indiana sites, it looked like there was minimal residents around those sites. And also, it looked like, maybe it was just the way it came across on the screen, but it looked like there was a lot more greenery than just a chain link fence around a lot of them.
I mean,
And-
let's stop there. Okay, so this is the one in Indianapolis.
All right, okay, that's a big one, but there was some.
I mean, this is way more residential.
Yeah.
That's around this solar farm than any of the developments that are.
The first one you put up, the first one you put up there, Brazil, I think, didn't look like there was hardly anything around it. Maybe it's just the way it's coming across.
So
You got a few sites, but you don't have a whole subdivision, do you?
well, this one again, you'll see there's a full development right across the way from it. This site has a full residential development next to it. Also, residential developments to the northwest on this project.
But do all those have just chain link fences and no greenery?
No, but on the other hand, neither do ours. We have buffer yards on our projects, actually required by your code, where we're adjacent to residential developments. So we do have buffers put in for those.
So you'll have chain link fence and then greenery around the outside of it?
Yeah, I mean, not around the entire perimeter of the fence. In areas where there's a residential neighbor that,
So they're not looking just at a chain link
Exactly.
fence? Okay.
Ms. Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question. The home with the pool in the back that looked very attractive, do they own the land that the solar farm is located?
They acquired the land. It was a long 10-acre strip alongside of it.
Just asking different questions. I think if I can correct, you're
house.
asking whether or not
Do they own the
They own
land where the
adjacent
solar farm is
No.
located?
No, not at
They
all.
don't own the land?
No, it was a doctor who started a new practice there in Indianapolis, had moved from the West Coast. They bought a strip of land that was fairly nearby and developed an awesome house that they wanted to live on.
With the solar farm already there?
Correct.
Yes, in fact, if you look at the
Can you see it on the picture?
If you look at the picture, the
No.
picture on the left in
On the left is
2014 shows a
2014, on the
completed
right,
solar farm,
2016.
So they built after?
Right.
Okay.
and built, by the way, within the 150 foot, immediately at the 150 foot setback.
So they don't profit from that land at all?
And that's not from the setback. That's 150 feet from their house to the actual solar panels. If you look at the aerial, you can see that the distance between the house and the setback, or actually the property line, would be less than half of that.
If you honestly got that question, they have no profit, no financial involvement in the solar farm.
None.
Just to clarify, correct, they have no profit and no financial interest in the solar farm.
All right.
Yes, Mr. Lear. Hold on just a moment, please. There you
Is it
go.
appropriate to ask questions in terms of what was discussed at the hearing?
Is this mic on?
Is it appropriate to ask questions about what was discussed at the hearing, the ZBA hearing?
It's ZBA. We're not in that part of the agenda yet, so.
Okay.
Are you talking about last night, or are you
Last
talking?
night.
That is not before us today.
Okay.
So we should probably wait to discuss what happened last night until that comes before PZA and then the full board. So.
And we also can, that's not our project, so I wouldn't want to comment on someone else's site.
Oh, then I guess in terms of their project, I would have a question in terms of their project.
Yeah, it is.
I believe that at PZA there was discussion in terms of maintenance of these sites.
Could you pull your mic down? They can't hear you.
I believe at PZA there was discussion of what happened on your sites. Is there going to be both routine maintenance and as-needed maintenance?
Yes.
So the references to 3 times a year, whatever it was, would be just the routine, and there'd be also as needed?
The 3 times a year, was that? Yeah, so I can just speak for us, for Cypress Creek. A combination of routine and as-needed maintenance, less than 10 times per year is our estimate on a site this size.
Thank you.
Mr. Kinzinger, just a moment. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is more performance related rather than function and impact. It's my understanding that you will have a bond of some type to guarantee ongoing performance. Is that correct?
I believe the bond is intended to guarantee removal of the system should it cease to operate.
Very good.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's part of our ordinance. Anyone else questions here that are not specific to any site, or when we go through that, if somebody wants to pull something off consent agenda, we'll get to that. We can discuss any site specifically. So, Mr. Washington.
On the routine maintenance, that there, you indicate that there's flexibility there, that if the maintenance is needed in a greater routine or greater intervals, then you are flexible enough to do that.
That's right. And the reason why I'm not up here saying it'll be exactly this number of times per year is because we want to see how the grass grows. We want to see how the weeds come in, and most of the routine maintenance will be on the vegetative side. The electrical performance maintenance will be as needed and very infrequent.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. By the way, the invocation at the beginning of this meeting was absolutely wonderful, and I really
thank you.
Really enjoyed that.
As do we. That was to treat. Mr. Mulcahy, do you have something?
Yeah, just a quick question. Do you have a video security around the perimeters of these, or what type of security for the ongoing?
We have a secure gate. We have a locked gate. We don't typically have video security just for a lack of need.
Razor wire?
So it's a great question. And if you looked closely at some of the pictures I showed, you probably saw barbed wire. When we first started discussing projects in Illinois, we were hearing feedback that folks did not want to look at barbed wire and got more of the feeling that we'd be hiding a prison back there and something that people wouldn't want to look at. So immediately we just responded by saying, we will remove that, make sure the fence is high enough per the NEC National Electric Code and for our liking. And we've moved forward now with just a chain link fence with no razor wire or barbed wire at all.
Thank you.
All righty. Any more questions on the presentation? Okay, moving on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to certificates of recognition for 15 years of waiting for the certificate of recognition. No, I'm just kidding. Our courthouse has gone completely unmanned this whole time. No, I'd like to congratulate Toby Fulford for 15 years and Joseph Powers for 15 years with the Sheriff's Department. If you could join us up here, the microphone, the sheriff has, in lieu of pay, there's a certificate up there.
Just for the record, we do not have barbed wire around our jail. Okay, we'll do this seniority-wise since both are 15-year employees of the Sheriff's Office. First officer is Joe Powers. Joe's been with us 15 years, involved in the community, involved in a lot of things with our department, and does a great job with dealing with the public, and we're glad to have him as a deputy. So, Joe. You waited an hour for that, Joe. Next is Toby Fulford. Toby has been here also 15 years, 2 weeks shy of Officer Powers, as Officer Powers often lets him know. But Toby does a great job for us. He is also an FTO. So when this board approves the hiring of additional deputies, Toby will be one who will train them. And we know that's happening very shortly. So Toby, thank you. You do a great job for us. We're glad to have you.
Thanks. Knew I should have turned that microphone off sooner. Okay, moving on. Minutes of the last meeting from March 13th. I need a motion to approve, please. Mr. Surai, second. Mr. Who's next? I'm sorry, I saw a hand back there. Mr. Payton, I'm sorry. All those in favor? Those opposed? Claims Committee reports. I need a motion to approve the claims. Ms. Evans, second. Mr. Vickery. That'll be a roll call vote, please. Oh, yeah, why don't you read in the record? Make it official, yeah. I don't have a special meeting to do this again.
Mr. Chairman and members of the County Board, your Committee on County Claims would beg leave to report that they've examined the following claims presented and recommend payment. The clerk is hereby authorized and directed to issue orders to the several claimants payable out of the funds as follows. The Highway Fund, $234,481.19. All other funds, $387,049.82. Total for the month of February 2018 of $621,531.01. The General Fund, $1,303,270.16. All other funds, $3,561,628.42. Total for the month of February 2018 of $4,864,898.58. I'm done.
Can I get a roll call?
You want a roll call vote?
Please.
Okay. Mr. Tripp.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. LaJess. Mr. Vickery.
Aye.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mr. Tholen. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Mulcahy.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Byrne.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber. Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans. Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker. Mr. Ritter.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Moving on to department reports. I need a motion to combine and accept the reports. Mr. Seroy, second. Mr. Byrne, if I could get those read into the record.
County Collector's Monthly Report for February 2018. Total cash in bank and investments, $4,709,085.69. County Treasurer's Monthly Report for February 2018. Total checking accountants and cash, total of $9,154,194.17. General Fund, negative $4,425,987.88. The monthly building report for February 2018, total permits 16 and fees of $10,978. Total extra fees of $975 for a total of $11,953. Monthly resolution list for April 2018, total to the county of $16,529.84. And the Regional Superintendent of Schools quarterly report ending February 2018 is on file.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. I need to pull number 52 off of the consent agenda. We'll note that. Is there anything else that somebody would like to have pulled from the consent agenda? Mr. McConnell.
Yes, but I'd like to take the cases from 18-02 through 18-11 as a separate item, because those all have to do with the solar farm.
Could you call them out by number, please?
I did, 18-02, or do I need?
No, I need the actual resolution number. Could you pull your mic down, please, as well? Sorry. Yeah, at the end, there's a paragraph number or a parenthesis number.
Where am I looking at?
This number there, buddy.
Oh, clear down here. I got
Yeah.
it. Okay. 55
Okay.
through 64. I'd like to address those as one item instead of, I don't think we have to do them individually, but I'd like to do those as a conglomerate. Because it all has to do with the solar farm, does it not?
Yes. Those are all the solar farm ones. I want to make sure. There's, yep, that's all of them. All right. There's not much less. Is there anything else anybody wants to pull off of there?
No, you have what I was going to say, 55 to 64.
Alrighty, hearing nothing else, I guess could you read what's left into the record, please? Let me do a motion in a second first. Motion, Mr. Lejas, second, Mr. Vickery. Yeah, we can just read the ones that are left. Yeah.
Resolution authorizing execution and amendment of Section 5311 grant agreement. ZBA case 1712, request for zoning from R2 High Density Residential District to I2 General Industrial District on a parcel generally situated in Section 26 of Manteno Township. The petitioner is Homestar Bank and Financial Services, property owner and applicant. Resolution authorizing chairman to sign transit asset management plan. Declaration and disposal of surplus and unwanted equipment for the Management Information Services Department. Appointment of Troy Kaufman to the Joe Benes Drainage District. Authorizing the county board chairman to sign a settlement agreement with Enbridge Energy LP and release the surety bonds associated with a road use agreement. General interfund borrowing authorization until November 30th, 2018.
Alrighty, we have a motion and a second. I need a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Tripp.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Lejas.
Aye.
Mr. Vickery.
Aye.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mr. Tholen.
Aye.
Mr. McConnell.
Aye.
Mr. Mulcahy.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Byrne.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Ritter.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Okay, moving on to number 52. Could I get just the title read into the record?
Absolutely. Is that all correct? 102%?
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois, of reappointing Mark R. Rogers as county engineer.
Okay, first I need a motion to approve, and then we'll go with Mr. Ritter and Mr. Tripp. For the sake of clarification, I'll have Mark explain how the state works as far as their pay recommendations, or at least the way that they scale those things. Do you have a moment? Because we've gone through this. I want to make sure I get this down, because 102% looks a little different than what it actually is. So.
It's actually 0.5%.
Good morning. The Department of Transportation every year recommends a salary for each county engineer in the state of Illinois. The resolution before you is recommending that the county pay me 102% of that recommended salary. That salary for the last few years, last year it was a 0% increase. The year before was a 1%. The year before that was 1.5%. So it does vary, the increase. So this is just taking me to 102% of whatever the state recommends each year.
Basically a 2% raise. That's kind of what we had to do. So, yeah, which is what we were doing. We got all the agreements with our labor units, and that's what we're doing for non-labor. So we're trying to at least be similar along those lines. That's what I intend to bring back as far as when we establish elected officers' pay as well, too. So, any other questions regarding this? Okay, the motion is second. Let's do a roll call, even though we're not spending it yet. We're authorizing, so let's do that.
Mr. Tripp.
Aye.
Mr. Washington. Aye. Mr. Lejas. Aye. Mr. Vickery.
Aye.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mr. Tholen.
Aye.
Mr. McConnell.
Aye.
Mr. Mulcahy.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Byrne.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mrs. Evans.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Ritter.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Moving on to number 55, if we could read that into the record, please. Yes, just reading the title, not the whole thing. Sorry.
Thank you. ZBA case 1802, special use permit, section 121-99.C.34, solar farm in the A1 Agriculture District, section 19, Manteno Township, Manteno Sun 1 Solar Farm.
First need a motion to approve. We can do questions after that. Mr. Seroy, second, Mr. Byrne. Mr. McConnell, do you have questions?
Yeah, can't we take these all in a chunk? they're all dealing with the same solar farm, are they not?
No, there's two different companies involved.
Okay.
These are all different farms. They're all separate projects. Yeah.
What's the size of the one versus the other one?
Yeah, they're all roughly about the same size.
Same
They're all
size.
about 2 megawatt.
Okay.
Yeah.
Megawatts and roughly 13 and
I'm sorry?
13 and 20 acres.
Okay.
Between.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yes, Ms. Parker.
Yes, just point of clarification to address the fact that 1801 on Highland Road is not part of this package. I just want to make that clear.
Correct.
That we are not voting on that today. That will be taken care of at another meeting.
Right.
For those.
If you guys, everybody didn't hear, the Highland Road location is not on today's agenda.
It's not on today's agenda.
It's all the other ones that went through PZA. That one was at ZBA last night. It'll go to PZA next.
Thank you. Point of
Mr. Tripp, thank you.
Just a side comment. These solar farms are certainly more aesthetically pleasing than the big old windmills that are cluttering up our beautiful landscape. That's the comment.
Any other comments, I guess, about this particular number 55? I have a motion to say. I don't think I need roll. Mr. Snipes, you had something?
Yes. The reason that I looked at 55 through 64 and the as to taking them off the consent agenda is I think we need the clarification. What is what and what is it that the people are in opposition to? It's my understanding now that those that were in opposition, I guess that spoke today, deals with the Highland area.
Yes.
And then these individuals here has went through the process and the hearings, and you don't have a substantial amount of objections against them.
Well, you can go through each one. Those are noted in your packet as far as any questions that came up at the hearings, which is what ZBA or PZA has to use as evidence. So that's what that committee used as evidence. It's not, maybe what you heard earlier. It's we have to only use evidence presented at the ZBA case, or if we ask questions of a particular of the solar farm companies at the time. So I can't think of any more than,
I mean, there was some objection to some of these.
Right.
Okay.
The zoning board did not feel that it was substantial enough to deny the application.
Yes, Mr. McConnell.
Mr. Chairman, were the, obviously the complaints were the ones directly around the farms?
Not always.
Not always.
No, we had a gentleman from Minnesota at one of the hearings, yes.
Really?
He's just passing through.
So the
had nothing to do.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Delbert, so the comments you've got, or how the PZA did this, they took everybody that was around that farm, had the opportunity to object or to approve or whatever, and you didn't feel you had hardly any opposition to these farms, is that correct?
It's the zoning board of appeals job to accept all information, testimony, and evidence, and then derive a decision based on that. So that, decision or recommendation, excuse me. County board does the decision. And for whatever reason, through their deliberations, they did not feel that the evidence supported a denial, and they voted unanimously to approve all of these. There's more specifics in your packet for the finding of fact reports for each one.
Well, I guess there was one comment that was in the packet, and I'll just give you an example. There are, at times, people speak for it as well. So it's not just all opposed. One comment, and it's in your packet, it says, hey, concerns about the loss of farmland, the hiding of this facility behind trees, which some people actually want to have happen. So it's a little bit different. And then the attraction of large rodents to the site, which I don't know anything about that. So there's, yeah. So anyway, that's in your packets. For each one of these, we can flip through and look at those objections if you'd like. Mr. Snipes.
That was my overall objection, is that when we take in the good farmland and then moving, I have a problem if it's, questionable farmland, but farmland with that gives us our tomatoes and potatoes and our beans and our greens. I want those preserved at all costs because we are an area of farmers. I come off a farm, 60 acres of farm, so I am very cognizant of the fact of farmland, and I preserve farmland at all costs before I try to take it out of commission, whether it's a wind farm, solar farm, anything that's contrary to the productivity of food or the natural resources that we have from the farm.
Okay, thank you. And I
can respond
do,
to that if you'd like.
Well, I do have one comment because I'm not going to comment on these beyond that, and it was my opportunity to say this. The farmer makes their own decisions. This is the United States of America. They're being highly compensated more than the farm ground is going to be, would be for production, or else they wouldn't be doing this. So it's not the county board. You said we are taking farmland out of production. That is not the case. The farmer is taking his own land out of production and making more revenue than they would have than they would as a farmer. So I believe that it's their choice as long as it does not physically harm other people. That's what the process is. So that's just my own opinion. You can have your own. I'm not telling you not to, but that's just mine. And I'm not going to keep doing this for each one of these. But I don't want the misconception that the county or anybody else is forcing the hand of anybody. It's economics that are driving this, and the farmer makes the decision. So that's all I have to say about it. So sorry, I just went Forrest Gump on you.
I can comment on it if you'd like.
Del, you had something?
Yes, the Kankakee County Soil and Water Conservation District developed a LISA score for every one of these sites, which is part of our special use process. And none of the scores indicated that the land should be designated for agricultural preservation. So it is poor farmland that they are being built on.
Thank you. Anything, Mr. First time, Mr. Vickery? Did you have something? Anyone? Okay. Yeah, Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Where these wind farms, the solar farms are going, the farmer still owns the land. He's leasing the land to this company, correct?
That's correct.
So it's his choice totally of what he wanted to do with his own land.
Yes. At least in every instance that's been before us so
I'm sorry?
far. In every instance that's been before us so far, the farmer owns the land and is leasing it to a solar farm development company.
I got it. So he has a right to do whatever he wants to do with his own land. Within reason.
Regulations.
Within reason.
Within regulations, yeah. Now Mr. Vickery has something. All right.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the application is by the farm owner, right?
Well, actually, both entities have to sign it, but yes.
Have to sign it.
Yes.
They're part of the process.
They are,
Yeah,
yes.
part of the application. Thank you.
Anyone else on this particular one for 18-02? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? All righty, motion carries. Moves on to 1803. Can we get that title read into the record?
ZBA case 18-03, special use permit, section 121-99.c.34, solar farm, in the A1 Agriculture District, section 20, St. Anne Township, Newman Solar, LLC.
I need a motion to approve. Mr. Ritter, second. Mr. Washington. Any questions? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to 1804. Same movie.
ZBA case 18-04, special use permit, section 121-99.c.34, solar farm, in the A1 Agriculture District, section 08, Limestone Township, Vulcan Solar, LLC.
Motion to approve. Mr. Vickery, second. Mr. Kinzinger. Any questions about this specific site? All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Let me flip to the right page here. Moving on to 58.
ZBA case 18-05, special use permit, section 121-99.c.34, solar farm, in the A1 Agriculture District, section 21, Moments Township, Jasper Solar, LLC.
Motion to approve. Mr. Byrne, second. Mr. Seroy, any questions? All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to 1806.
ZBA case 1806, special use permit, section 121-99.c.34, solar farm, in the A1 Agriculture District, section 21, Moments Township, Jasper Solar 2, LLC.
Motion to approve. Mr. Mulcahy, second. Mrs. Peters, Any questions about this particular site? All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. 60, please.
ZBA case number 18-07, special use permit section 121-99.c.34, solar farm in the A1 Agriculture District, section 03, Limestone Township, Illini Solar LLC.
All righty. Motion to approve. Mr. Ritter, second. Mr. Byrne. Any questions about this site? All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. All righty. Moving on to 61.
ZBA case 18-08, special use permit section 121-99.c.34, solar farm in the A1 Agriculture District, section 07, Limestone Township, Mojo Solar LLC.
Motion to approve. Mr. Seroy, second. Mrs. Evans. Any questions? All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Mojo Rising. All right. I've been waiting for that for like 2 weeks. On to 62.
ZBA case 18-09, special use permit section 121-99.c.34, solar farm in the A1 Agriculture District, section 23, Aroma Township, Peterman Solar LLC.
Motion to approve. Mr. Burns, second. Mr. Ritter. Any questions about that site? All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Nay on 62? Noted. Motion carries. Moving on to 63.
ZBA case 18-10, special use permit section 121-99.c.34, solar farm in the A1 Agriculture District, section 15, Yellowhead Township, Saint Solar LLC.
Motion to approve. Mr. Ritter, second. Mr. Byrne. Any questions about that particular location? All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? 64.
ZBA case -1811, special use permit section 121-99.c.34, solar farm in the A1 Agriculture District, section 22, Yellowhead Township, Saint Solar 2 LLC.
Motion to approve. Mr. Ritter, second. Mr. Mulcahy, any questions? All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Oh, come on, is that all? I think that was it. All righty. Thank you for your time on that. Now, remember that any board member can come to PZA to hear these first person, or at your leisure on your phone or on the videotape, because this is all public. So, you know, this is not a bad thing to have this discussion now, but we can, as we go forward, that's why I asked Cypress Creek to come and do a little explanation so we don't have to revisit this each time as far as the in-depth discussions. If there's anything ever for a particular site, obviously, please come and voice it. Highways and buildings. I do have, I need a motion to approve and waive the reading of the resolution. Mrs. Peters, second. Mr. Ritter, if you could, please read the concurring resolution and the highway bridge funds into the record. We probably should. Yeah, that's where we've gotten in the habit of doing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
The committee recommends the confirmation of the award of the contracts be as follows. Grasso Construction, section 18-04000-00-GM in the amount of $25,562. To Toby's Construction and Cartage for section 18-09136-01-AS in the amount of $99,333.90. To Grasso Construction for section 18-12000-00-GM in the amount of $104,633.55. To Hammond Wagner Excavating for section 18-12108-01-AS in the amount of $68,241.46.
Motion to approve. Mr. McConnell, second. Mr. Mulcahy, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Tripp.
Aye.
Mr. Washington. Mr. Legess. Mr. Vickery. Mr. Hess. Mr. Tholen. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Snipes. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Seroy. Mr. Lear. Mrs. Weber. Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans. Mr. Payton. Mrs. Parker. Mr. Ritter. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye, motion carries. Resolution appropriating county bridge funds. If we could just read the title into the record, please.
Resolution of the County Board appropriating county bridge funds for the repair of the Kankakee River Bridge in Aroma Park.
Motion to approve. Mr. Fairfield, I'm sorry?
And waive the reading.
Oh, and waive the reading of the rest of the resolution. Mr. Fairfield, Mr. Seroy, that's another roll call vote, please.
Mr. Tripp.
Aye.
Mr. Washington. Mr. Legess. Mr. Vickery. Mr. Hess. Mr. Tholen. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Snipes. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Seroy. Mr. Lear. Mrs. Weber. Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans. Mr. Payton. Mrs. Parker. Mr. Ritter. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye, motion carries. All righty, moving on to PZA. Need a motion to approve and waive the reading of the first resolution 72. Mr. Washington, second. Mr. Vickery, if you could just read the title in, please.
Resolution of the County Board authorizing execution and amendment of Downstate Operating Assistance Grant Agreement.
Any questions about that? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Tripp. Mr. Washington. Mr. Legess. Mr. Vickery. Mr. Hess. Mr. Tholen. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Snipes. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Seroy. Mr. Lear. Mrs. Weber. Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans. Mr. Payton. Mrs. Parker. Mr. Ritter. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye, motion carries. Similar purchase service agreement, number 73, a motion to approve and waive the reading. Mr. Byrne, second. Mr. Legess, please read that in the record.
Resolution of the County Board regarding purchase of service agreement with Show Bus to operate the county's rural general public transportation service, state fiscal year FY19.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions about that? All righty. Roll call vote.
Mr. Tripp.
Aye.
Mr. Washington. Mr. Legess. Mr. Vickery. Mr. Hess. Mr. Tholen. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Snipes. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Seroy. Mr. Lear. Mrs. Weber. Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans. Mr. Payton. Mrs. Parker. Mr. Ritter. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye, motion carries. Moving on to finance. Need a motion to approve and waive the reading of the resolution. Mr. Mulcahy, second. Mr. Legess. If we could read that title into the record, please.
Resolution of the County Board regarding emergency authorization for elevator repair at the Kankakee County Detention Center.
Is there any questions about this? We've kind of covered this in committee extensively. Yeah, there's nobody stuck in it, so, okay. Yeah, that thing's, it's seen better days, so we've got a real problem that we have to address in an emergency fashion, so. I'll roll call vote then.
Mr. Tripp. Aye. Mr. Washington. Aye. Mr. Legess. Mr. Vickery. Aye. Mr. Hess. Aye. Mr. Tholen. Aye. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Mulcahy. Aye. Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Byrne. Aye. Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans. Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Ms. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Ritter.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye, motion carries. Moving on, other business. Not some openings, there's quite a few. Oh boy. Opening on the Kankakee County Regional Planning Commission. One opening on the Board of Examiners and Appeals. One opening on the Mantino Drainage District number 3. Mantino Drainage District number 9, Wilcan Regional Development Authority, Kankakee County Board of Review, Kankakee River Valley Forest Preserve District Board, Bourbonnais Fire Protection District Board, and the Cabery Area Fire Protection District. I have 2 openings on the Essex County Fire Protection District, and 1 opening on the following: Grant Park Fire Protection District, Greater Momence Fire Protection District, Kankakee Township Fire Protection District, Limestone Fire Protection District, Mantino Community Fire Protection District, Pilot Township Fire Protection District, 2 openings on the Reddick Community Fire Protection District, 1 opening on the St. Anne Fire Protection District, and that's it. Some of these we've already got the applications in for, but so most of them you'll see coming back next month. So now, any old business? Mr. Snipes?
I think I brought up some time ago that we need to create a way so that the 17th, I believe it's the 17th district under Pat Polk, because of her condition, that we have something by phone or something that allows her to hear and to also vote.
I'm in contact with her about that, just so you know. We're trying to somehow piece together a computer for she can vote by text, and there's a delay on watching the video. It's like 10 seconds. So we're trying to work something out with her.
Oh, okay. Just want to make sure that's covered.
Yep. Yeah.
19.
Sure. Sure. He's trying to move you out, George. See what he's doing? Any new business for the board to consider? Motion to adjourn? Mr. Legesse, did you have a comment?
I'd just like to say that it's very nice to be back. I don't know how you guys ever adjourned a meeting. And my doctor didn't understand how at the end of each of our sessions I said, "Are we adjourned?" And,
Many times we just say.
So could I consider that a motion, Mr. Legesse?
Pardon?
Is that a motion?
Yes.
Okay. Second, Mr. Mulcahy. All those in favor? Those opposed? Have a good day.